Let's welcome our guest into the studio. So this is Dr. Micah Johnson. Good morning, Dr. Johnson. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. So Dr. Johnson is an assistant professor in the Department of Mental Health, Law, and Policy at the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. I'm a former South Florida graduate. Alumni here in the house. So he received his Ph.D. in sociology from the University of Florida and completed a National Institute of Health, National Institute on Drug Abuse, oh my gosh, T32 postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Epidemiology at UF. So, Doctor, your credentials is like amazing. So, congratulations on all of your professional accolades and accomplishments. There were a couple of things that really stood out for me. You have, for example, research and interest in areas such as the effects of childhood psychological trauma, the epidemiology of polysubstance misuse in pediatric populations, social inequalities, including race and racism, and health disparities among adolescents in the juvenile justice system. So a lot to unpack. I know you're only here with us for a little bit this morning, but we wanted to at least, have the discussion on International Overdose Awareness Day so that people are aware of how drugs are impacting their community. So perhaps if you could give us your initial thoughts on just the impact of drugs on any community. And, what do you think you would tell the people of the Cayman Islands about it?
Yeah, that's the most interesting part of my work is how many people are impacted by drug use.
Mhm.
It's a connecting. It's one of those connecting adversities that
Mm,
everyone in some way has been tied or connected to someone who struggled with addiction or substance misuse. It's a really sneaky type of situation because, as you were discussing earlier, folks tend to focus on these extreme, obvious symptoms of
mhm,
addiction, the physical symptoms, the stereotypical symptoms associated with addiction, and also the types of lifestyles. There are a lot of folks who are high functioning. There's a lot of folks who
mm,
still very privately and secretly use. There are folks who struggle their entire lives and they fight with all their might to get clean and they relapse and it's just a battle. It's a struggle. So I think the main thing to know is how serious it is for certain
mhm,
populations and how it can completely destroy things that matter to us most, our relationships, the way we make our
mhm.
money and provide for our family, our reputations, even our talent and our art is sort of
Right.
tremendously damaged when you get to the point of addiction and substance misuse. So that's the main thing is, so can we fully appreciate, one, how it affects all domains of life,
Mhm.
even among high functioning folks, just because the public may not be aware, that person is well aware that their life has been tremendously affected by their use.
Mhm.
So it affects all domains of life. And the second piece of it is, I really want folks to know that this is a mental health phenomenon. This is
Mhm.
it's almost hard to understand that it's not about choice,
Mhm.
right? This is something that someone cannot help as much as they can't choose away cancer in their body. You can't
Mhm.
choose away cancer in your body. Yes, folks do things that put themselves at risk, but when you're at the point of addiction, or when you have these predispositions to addiction, it's just like any other illness where it's like it's upon you, and there's medicines that you can take to get better, but it's one of the most serious things to shake as far as mental health disorders. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who are able to bounce back, especially folks who go through serious addictions and are able to bounce back and restore their lives. So that's my two main uh focus points of starting
Mhm.
out, is that let's understand how serious it is and how it affects
Mhm.
diverse domains. Let's all have an appreciation of it is a serious monkey on folks' back, and they need a lot of support and resources to get that monkey off their back.
Right. Wow. And I think, sort of picking up on your second point there, a lot of us who don't have drug addiction problems often think, why can't they just stop?
Right.
Why can't they say no? So you're saying it's not as easy as that. And, perhaps as a community, we need to understand that first and foremost. And then how do we get them help? Like, what does it take to get a crack addict off of crack. We just had a young man died a couple of days ago, and someone sent me his picture, sort of before and after, and no teeth. He was only 48 years old, I think. He looked like he was a 70-year-old man. And how do you, as you said, it's like an illness, right? You can't really help yourself as much as maybe the general community thinks. But once you've gotten started, how do you pull somebody back, or how do you help them pull themselves out of that type of situation? What type of help is it that they're really needing?
Exactly. Well, there's preventative aspects, and then there's treatment aspects.
Right.
Before I get into the treatment aspects, I'm going to talk about prevention.
Yes.
What we do in epidemiology. So epidemiology basically is the study of epidemics. And I know you know that because you pronounced it correctly, but for the listeners, for the viewers and listeners, epidemiology is a study of addiction. So when you're looking at sort of psychiatric epidemiology, it's sort of like, why are there these hot spots of mental disorder in certain geographic areas? So we treat it as if it's an epidemic. And similar with substance misuse, it's sort of where we study these outbreaks where drugs just explode, sometimes simultaneously. And then we try to understand what caused that. So we understand that, honestly, a lot of these phenomenons are social phenomenons, meaning they exist based on social factors, meaning a lot of the causes that you see of the upswing in drug use are socially rooted in micro level factors, not at the individual level. So if we know that, then we need those solutions need to also have micro aspects as well. We tend to put everything on the individual to pull themselves out of a social context that may be driving their addiction.
Right.
And also in epidemiology, we do this cool thing where we simply investigate what are the factors, individual, community level, macro level. What are the factors that drive substance misuse, that predict it? And interestingly, one of the factors that predicts substance misuse, especially among young people, is hopelessness. Hopelessness is the underlying root cause epidemic among our youth.
Wow.
So what can we do now? That's a community, family level problem. That's not, some individuals may have depression that's tied to them, but depression doesn't correlate with these spikes of addiction. So what can we do as family members, community members, neighbors, and members of a society to address the hopelessness that people are feeling? Why are people so hopeless? And then we could talk about that. We can sort of immediately come up with things of why. We could talk about the lack of relationships, the lack of human contact, all these different sort of factors that exist in society that kind of drive this feeling of hopelessness. So let's go into treatment. So what folks can do for treatment. Now, the good news is there's a ton of effective treatments for specific things like cocaine, opioid misuse, all sorts of types of substance misuse. But the problem is it does require resources, and it does require buy-in. It's hard to get officials and the powers to be to invest if they're still thinking of it as pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and make better decisions. But if we could then have that buy-in, that's why that social awareness in this show is so important, because once we have that public increase in knowledge and understanding of this thing, that it's not really an individual level type of a phenomenon, it's really a social type of phenomenon, then we can say, okay, we understand, we can have empathy, we can have compassion. It's interesting how knowledge sort of fuels the better parts of ourselves. And a lot of our lack of patience and lack of grace have to do with just not really understanding what people are going through.
Right.
Whether it be traffic or addressing substance misuse, it's the same thing. When you have that lack of understanding of what that other person may be going through, it fuels your lack of patience and your lack of grace. But if we have more grace, more patience, we can destigmatize this phenomenon, and then I think there'll be more support in leadership among stakeholders and so on to sort of push some resources towards this. So we know that there's medical treatments that work, there's behavioral health treatments that work. There are digital treatments that like reminders of how are you feeling, and like text messages that guide people through not using in that moment. And so there's all sorts of things that are really cool, innovative, that actually work. But at at the end of the day, the things that work the most, again, are the things that also accompany family support and community support and social relationships. Again, you see the cause and the treatment has to do with community. So this is a really
Very
interesting
deep.
phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting phenomenon because it reminds us that human beings were really social people.
Right.
We are bred, born, and evolved to kind of get along and treat each other okay. It's a really interesting thing, you know. It's like
so you need the support then of the society, the family support, and the larger society, the political support. All of these different, as you say, stakeholders have to be involved and surround people who are suffering from addiction to be able to really support them and help them out of that situation.
Yep. And then you have people that we have this phenomenon called like spontaneous cessation or spontaneously quitting. You have people that could just stop. And we really don't understand that in science. But that's not really the norm. Then you have this other group that sort of binges. They don't use all the time, but when they use, they go pretty hard. I mean, the sort of college stereotypical use, right?
Yes.
But for the most part, yes, it requires that buy-in. You know, it's not about one-on-one with a therapist. It's not just about taking some medicine. It's truly about creating social support for that person. And that's when we see the best results and people recover from really difficult things.
Yeah. And one of the issues that I always harp on, and I think people have to eventually recognize the connection between adults who are broken is children who, have to endure childhood trauma. And on this island, we don't seem to have a real grasp on sexual abuse cases, especially of children and minors. And, we catch a few here and there. And, the perpetrators are largely getting away because they're family members or they're people known in communities. And, they get to abuse generations and generations of children and live their entire lives as they wish. And I keep saying to people, if we are allowing this sort of epidemic of sorts to happen to our children and we're not addressing it, oftentimes, even when the illness or the situation is discovered and the perpetrator might go to jail, the child still isn't getting the support that they need. They don't get enough therapy. It's like, okay, you just move on with your life and you try to live this normal life, not understanding the real impact that trauma is going to have on that child. Including sometimes leading to having addiction issues, having emotional, issues that then they only know how to cope with by using drugs. And so, you talk about sort of the underlying root causes of a lot of this, and this is but one example of something that we really need to start focusing on at the micro level.
Absolutely. And there's a direct pathway from trafficking and sexual abuse and addiction as a coping mechanism. Also addiction as a weapon to control people and isolate them from their families who could kind of support them and pull them out of the situations they're in. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the strongest factors, in addition to hopelessness and also related to hopelessness, is adverse childhood experiences or trauma, what they call ACEs or trauma. That's one of the more powerful predictors that we see. But human trafficking and exploiting children is one of those pieces that, not just addiction, but to have people heal. It's just one of the most harmful things. And in the way it affects families and communities is also detrimental. So I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm not sure of the infrastructure there, but there definitely has to be, because it's one of those cyclical things too. Of course, it's economically driven, right? So people are doing this to make some living, doing the sick crime to make a living off of exploiting children. But also folks that are not seeking monetary gain, who sort of take advantage of children or sexually abuse adolescents and minors. These folks may have trauma themselves, so it creates this cycle. And I actually worked on a case that was really, really fascinating, where a mother was sort of trafficked by her parents. And then she ended up involving her daughter in a situation like that, or introducing her to the game as they saw it. And it's like, man, this is a clear embodiment, microcosm of the cycle of trauma within a family, but it happens like that within society. But you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those things where folks cannot live normal lives. Folks have to be held accountable for their actions. And then it's on us again. Parents must protect children, but also it is the responsibility and duty of communities to protect children, and certainly the responsibilities of the government to make sure that the public is safe, but especially the children and that they serve are safe. So the government needs to step up and do what they have to do to keep kids safe.
Absolutely. All right, we have a couple comments that are coming in. So Ms. Darlene says, let's not speculate. It was a class A drug and could be prescribed meds, just saying we don't really know. I think she's referring to the young man that we had sort of mentioned.
You say it was crack cocaine, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what he was using that everybody kind of
I don't
knew.
think they're going to prescribe crack cocaine, but that's a really good point, though.
Well, she's saying that maybe it wasn't really crack. Maybe it was some other drug overdose, but
okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, if somebody's a crack addict, it's kind of like the path of least resistance. If it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, and sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck. Yes, it's possible he might have choked on his water that day, but the chances of that being the possible cause of his death when he had been a long time addict is, again, this is where as a community, we need to be honest. Like sometimes I feel like even when we're looking at a situation, we're looking at an individual, we can't be honest at exactly what we're seeing. Like we're always looking, well, maybe it was this, or maybe, we kind of look for these things that make the situation seem like maybe he was on prescribed drugs. Like they gave him too much pain medication or whatever. I
think there's a good point in there. I think that their point is the addiction could have started with prescribed medicine. And this is decimating different communities in America. So if someone says, I have pain, and then a doctor says, okay, just take a bunch of these, and this has happened a lot, that could start someone on the pathway towards addiction with street drugs. So it could be that mechanism that I just came to get a prescription, and now you didn't tell me how potent this stuff is, and now I can't live without it. So it's like that's one pathway by which people become addicted,
right? But
not with cocaine.
Yeah,
cocaine is
nobody's prescribing cocaine for anything these days.
Not in our prospective countries. Maybe in other places, but not in our prospective country.
Yeah. So you little brat is saying that we don't have a diagnosis on the death of this man yet, as it just happened 2 days ago. Someone could have killed him using his own drug of choice. So you see all these theories. Again, it's like I feel like we in this community in particular are not willing to be brutally honest. Why would someone go kill a crackhead, a known substance abuser, with their drug of choice? Like it doesn't even make any, like this isn't some conspiracy theorist James Bond movie where someone's going to kill you with your own crack pipe or shoot you up and make you overdose because he has $1 million insurance policy they're trying to collect on. Like I just really feel like we just need to be honest. And on this program, we try to push the boundaries a little bit. Sometimes it makes you uncomfortable. It's making you all uncomfortable right now that I'm saying that 99% he probably just died from an overdose. Whether it was long-term drug use that just, made the heart go, click and that was it. Or he might have been in that moment shooting up. I don't know which of those situations. What I'm saying is his addiction eventually caused his premature death at the age of 48. He should have been a healthy guy. He shouldn't have been walking around no teeth in his mouth. He shouldn't have been walking around looking emaciated and all these things. And these things make you uncomfortable. If I showed you the picture right now, you'd be like, oh, Sandy, that's not very nice. And, I'm tired of being nice because the niceness doesn't get you anywhere in terms of the reality check that we need in this community in order to be able to address these issues. So Jonathan
I think also they're missing your point. And your point was just using that. This is an example of something that's happened in our community. It wasn't like, okay, we're going to diagnose and dissect this particular case.
Exactly.
I mean, use it as an example, and to your point, you don't have to have a perfect example, but it was just an example. Yeah. And to your point, yes, cocaine decimates your social life, it decimates your physical health, and it does put you at risk of early death. I mean, that's a fact.
And so does alcoholism. I mean, we've seen people who, were alcoholics their entire lives and they just couldn't stop. Even when the doctor said, listen, if you continue to drink, you are going to die. You're going to have organ failure. All these things are going to happen to you. And, it's very much a situation that we know a number of people in this community, family members and friends, have unfortunately found themselves in. So Jonathan is a supporter of ganja, and so aka marijuana, and he says, good thing that it's a herb and you can't overdose on it unless it falls on you from a plane at 3,000 feet. So I want to talk about this because there is this desensitization to marijuana. In the Caribbean, we normally just call it ganja, but there is this desensitization to it, where essentially people see it as harmless. It's not a big issue. You can use it all you want. People even go as far as saying it's good for you. It's going to help you sleep better. You're going to be high functioning if you engage in marijuana use. What is the truth? What does the research actually say about marijuana?
This is a good question. Yeah, this is a great question. And there's millions of dollars that they're investing in researching right now because we do not know the adverse effects of the legalization efforts and initiatives that are occurring at this time. So the true answer is the experts in the world, the leading experts in the world, do not completely have all the answers. So that's okay, right? That's what smart people do. We admit when we're still investigating and collecting information. However, every single medicine, everyone has a safety zone, right? Even the best ones in the world have even water has a safety zone where too much of it will be harmful to you. And there's a zone where marijuana has a lot of benefits, and these benefits we've known these for hundreds of years. So there are real benefits of cannabis and marijuana, but nuance is important because not all cannabis is healthy, and not all cannabis is the stuff that Jonathan probably was exposed to or grew up on. Some of this stuff is very toxic and very harmful, and in certain dosages, yes, overdoses occur a lot, especially in adolescents and minors. You can overdose on marijuana. Full disclosure, trust me, you can overdose on marijuana, especially now with the edibles. And you have people that are mixing and they're not really qualified to combine the certain types of things they're putting together and the way they're cooking some of the edibles. So yeah, folks can definitely overdose on marijuana. It definitely has some serious adverse health effects. But I think what folks are talking about when you talk about the health benefits are the healthy dosages. And so I think that has to be the way we talk about marijuana is responsible use of marijuana as for medicinal purposes or even for recreational purposes, but still responsible use, just like alcohol.
And the legalization of it is certainly allowing certain jurisdictions, say, for example, the state of California, to really perhaps do a bit more research now that it is legal on whether there's a connection with people who, use marijuana versus the number of opioid users. And there's so many different sort of subsections of research that I know that are actually ongoing. But I read an article recently, I'll have to find it for Jonathan's benefit, that really said there are a lot of adverse things with marijuana use that people in communities need to be very, very much aware of. Sometimes if a person has an addictive personality, the thing that they grab onto is marijuana. It might not be cocaine. And if it's easier for them to get marijuana for whatever reason, then that's exactly, what it is that they're going to use. And, we see young men in our communities who sit down all day, smoke marijuana. They're not productive. They don't do anything with their lives. They're not getting education. They're not forward thinking about a career or family or anything else. And I see them every single day when I go to court and they're standing up before a judge and they're like, okay, now we're putting you in drug court and marijuana is still illegal in this jurisdiction and you need to come off of it. And despite being in court, they can't even stop, when they go to do their urine test, they can't stop smoking. It keeps coming up positive. And the judge is like, I'm going to be sending you to jail because obviously, the drug court program, the therapy that we're trying to give you isn't working, but it's because it's an addiction for them. It's not, people think that, it's something I can use recreationally and not get addicted to it. The other really important thing I think that people miss about marijuana is the impact that it has on the young brain. The younger you are as a user of marijuana, teens, preteens, and even, early adolescents, the more likely you are to have an issue with a substance like marijuana.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the effects of THC on the brain. There's a ton of like really fascinating neuroscience research on that. For anyone who's listening, you can go to Google Scholar and just type in cannabis and the brain or cannabis adverse effects and look at some literature reviews, and you'll find that a lot of the folks who write these articles are not necessarily anti-cannabis or anti.
Mhm.
Um, marijuana, but they're conducting that research so folks are aware. But
Mhm.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
There definitely are some serious effects that people need to be aware of. Some of them they already know because that's the reason why they use it. That sort of feeling to help with anxiety. So the
Mhm.
altered senses, the change in mood, the impaired body movement. But sometimes there's stuff like impaired memory. Some folks hallucinate. Some folks have delusions, and some folks even have psychosis, even before they reach the stage of addiction. You have
Mhm.
some of these symptoms. So that's something folks should know about.
Right. We have Soka who says it's certainly their choice the first time. I always wonder why anyone would start taking drugs knowing the end results. Same with cigarettes. Please, people start smoking knowing millions are trying to stop, but let me stop thinking humans are all smart. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
again, I think we could benefit from thinking of it as, you know, as a mental health phenomenon.
Hmm.
Some people they do it one time and they're addicted, and so let's start thinking about choice, right? So
Hmm.
first of all, what we define as a drug, anytime you take a cup of coffee or you pop some medicine, you're taking a drug.
Hmm.
And most drugs have some side effects or consequences.
Hmm.
So all of us, none of us are so brilliant that we avoid taking any kind of drug. We all consume drugs. That's just a way of life for human beings, and it's been that way for a long time, especially in our prospective countries. I mean, drug use has been around for a long time, from ceremonial stuff to healing stuff. So it's
Hmm.
there. Demonizing, stigmatizing certain people because of the types of drug choices they're exposed to, because it's also about exposure and access. That's why the opioid crisis missed certain communities in the first wave, because they literally didn't have access to the medicines. Once they had
Hmm.
access, it didn't devastate these communities as well. So it is sort of about access, it's about availability, but it's also about these social elements. Someone in the chat was talking about poverty and a lack of
Hmm.
resource, a lack of employment opportunities. All of these macro factors are what really predicts drug use, not intelligence. Some of the most intelligent people, some of the most talented
Hmm.
people in the world are victims of addiction.
Hmm. Wow. Good morning to Sarah Sue. Sarah Sue says, thank you for speaking on this, Sandy, especially the childhood trauma triggering the addiction issues. Ms. Jackie is here. Ms. Jackie is a local advocate of people with mental health. She says, what a refreshing and enlightening show this morning. Far too long, we in Cayman have looked down on the addict and pushed them to the wayside. Emma, I hope that you're tuned in. Um, she says, Sandra, this is the type of show that we need at least twice per week. Education, education, education. This is what starts the change reaction. And Sarah Sue also says that hurt people hurt people. Good morning to Debbie. Jim says a lot of physicians are drug pushing dealers, whether it be prescribed or not. So that's quite interesting. And of course, we can see even with the opiate, phenomenon in the U.S. in particular, where that has been very, very true. There have been, people prescribing it when perhaps they should have been looking at other options and other modalities of care and treatment for people who might have been suffering from pain and other sorts of issues. So that is certainly a grave area of concern. Good morning to Miss Shirley. Jonathan says, I don't know about high functioning, but it'll make you sleep. I guess that's in relation to marijuana. Miss Shirley says, they may say it's an herb, but I know people that are very addicted to it. And as Dr. Johnson said, yes, it can be like any other drug, addictive. So good morning to Chris K joining us from South America. So good to see you tune in. Jonathan says, take 10 aspirins and talk to me in the morning. So he's very pro his herbal medication being a source, he says, of no concern. Akrina says, I like this man a lot. Where is he from? Does he live in Cayman? So no, he's a guest joining us. And Dr. Johnson, how tight are you on time? I know we only had you booked for half an hour. We want to be respectful of your time.
I'm with you. As long as you need me, I'll be
awesome.
here.
So he is from the University of South Florida. I can send you guys his bio, but he's an assistant professor at USF in the Department of Mental Health, Law, and Policy at the University of South Florida. So folks, if you have any questions for our guest this morning, this is definitely, the time to ask those questions. He has a Ph.D. in sociology from UF, the University of Florida, and he's completed, again, research, a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Epidemiology at UF as well, and lots of interesting areas. Can we talk a little bit about the social inequalities, including race and racism, that might lead to mental health issues and even drug addiction?
Right. Yeah. So it starts with historical trauma, which we've learned a lot more about in the last 10, 20 years. And so sociologists have talked about this for a while, like the lifetime effects of social circumstances on families, communities, and individuals, but also the way that's passed down from generation to generation through prolonged inequality for certain groups, but also through sort of epigenetic mechanisms, meaning genes expressions are changed based on what people are exposed to. So you can have a predisposition to addiction that lays dormant because you have a wealth of resources. And you're not exposed to, you don't have a high ACE score, which is adverse childhood experiences score. You don't have a high amount of trauma. So maybe your addiction predisposition lays dormant, right? But what if you can have no genetic predisposition to addiction, but live in an area where drugs are readily available and you're socialized to use drugs as a coping mechanism or as a means to heal, right? So then you would have this social creation of addiction that could be passed down from mother to child and so on and so forth. And then you have this thing where it's like you could have this predisposition that is exacerbated or triggered by your social circumstances. Now, the reason why racism becomes important is because a part of what we mean by systemic racism, and it's just institutional racism is what we're saying. Institutional and historical, meaning for a while, institutions treated people differently in a way that caused health problems. So with that, a great example of it is UF, the school that educated me. For the majority of its existence, Black people were not allowed to be on campus, to go there to take credits. We were not allowed to be there. You cannot expect us to have pictures on the wall. We were excluded historically and systemically. Of course, you can't expect us to be at the same exact level education-wise if our parents, grandparents, and their parents and grandparents could not even obtain an education in the state except for one place.
Right.
So that's what we mean by institutional racism or systemic racism. Now, that in education, of course, has an effect on the educational tradition in the family, first generation versus fifth generation, and how the way people grow up, and then like the social things that help you with education. Addiction is the same way. Trauma is the same way. So we have trauma that is passed down. You have a context that still exists. We still have pockets of ghettos that affect certain people, opposed to other people. And we still have this thing that the scars of the past can be handed down from mother to child through epigenetics, and also through socialization in similar contexts. So race comes into play because one, lack of resources, living in communities that are isolated, literally pushed away from medical facilities, the way that healthcare works, the economic components to healthcare, all of those things play a role that affect certain racial groups more than others. Now, the interesting thing is that you have situations where, for example, Black individuals have a lot more barriers to receiving healthcare, and they have a lot more access to potentially traumatic experiences, whether it be things like just living in a neighborhood that's more likely to live in a neighborhood where there's more elements that can be harmful, whether it be violence, whether it could be lead poisoning, it could be poor water like Flint, Michigan, all of these things that certain minority groups are more exposed to. Now, there's also groups that have like geographic risk factors that are similar to like race, like folks who live in rural areas, folks who live on dirt roads, folks that breathe in sort of toxic chemicals if they live near a plant or live near some huge transportation compound, or folks who literally just can't get access to resources to help them with it, to improve their health. So all of these things are important. There's a group in America that live in the Appalachian Mountains, the white folks, who are one of the most marginalized groups and have some of the worst health disparities. They're rural, they're stigmatized, and they're pushed into the Appalachian Mountains in a way. So this is how it works, right? Similarly, racism affects certain groups differently. But what I'm getting at is that this idea of where you live, it has a huge impact on your health. And how well your parents lived has a huge impact on your health. And then if you don't have access to those resources, you have a higher chances of self medicating through illegal or illicit drugs or just misusing substances. And you also have a higher likelihood of engaging in substance misuse as a coping mechanism. Again, it's about how we treat each other. It's about where we live. And it's about how close do we, how fast can we get help? And that's why I love my job, and I'm very passionate what I do, because I love people and I believe in people. And my job allows me to first understand something that really affects a lot of people, and then two, be a part of the help, getting people the help they need to live great lives and then continue to treat each other better.
Right. A lot to unpack from what you just said, trust me. Let me start here. When you talk about trauma impacting and changing the very genetic makeup of people, I've discussed that before on this program. And when I was at USF, I was in my last semester and I kind of had like, okay, I just needed to make up credits. I was pretty much done with all my core stuff and I didn't know what to do. So I took, and this would have been like the late, I think this would have been like 95, so mid 1990s. So taking an online course back then was like pretty much unheard of. They didn't really exist, but there was one that was largely online. There was no real classroom time. And it was a course on racism in America, but it was more like focused on the 40s to the 60s, like that part of slavery in the context of the African-American experience. And it was such an interesting course for me because number one, it was a real eye opener. I must admit that despite having studied American history, I moved to the US at the age of 9, grew up going to school, studying the traditional textbooks or whatever. This really brought it home from the perspective that I understood that the mechanism of slavery, if we want to call it that, institution of slavery, wasn't that long ago. Nope. And so there were still families who might have people alive who could remember, their parents being part of that machinery, being treated differently, being lynched. Like they remember the struggles of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they pass on that trauma, for lack of a better word, really, to their own children, generation after generation. And so, it was difficult to walk away from that class not feeling a bit of anger about the entire institution of slavery in America and how it has just disenfranchised an entire group of people. And it also gave me more respect for people when people say, oh, you just need to get over it. Like, that's no longer an issue. You have equality now. You've got all these other things in place. You've got affirmative action. It's time for you to get over it. And when I understood that trauma, whether it is, what happened to the Jews during World War II, but it has the ability to change your genetic makeup, to actually change your genes, like something that is physical about you, that then impacts not just you, but your offspring. That was like an aha moment for me. Because I'm like, hold on, the playing field might never be equal. Because if your genes are different, the way that you react to situations and the way that you, think and process and do things is completely different because of your genes. How can you ever even address that? Like, I don't know. That takes, for the 200 years that slavery was institutionalized, that's going to take another 500 years of not having that at any level to try to remove the damage that it's done, which I don't necessarily think it's possible, but you have to try to give people, I suppose, coping mechanisms to deal with it on a personal and familial level, right? So that was the first observation, even from what you said, because it's something that I've talked about before. And I don't know if people understand when I say that trauma impacts someone, DNA level.
Trauma gets in the body. Yeah. Gets under the skin. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then the other thing, when you talked about certain conditions that people grew up in, poverty, for example, rural areas, not having access to even opportunities as a young child to be able to get, an education and be able to get out of a situation, that then having the impact or the potential impact of future addiction, future mental health issues, I think is really, really important, because it's one of the issues that even here in the Cayman Islands, as affluent as we're supposed to be, there are, very well-known areas of poverty. And sometimes people are in a situation that they themselves are not recognizing, well, how do I, maybe the community, maybe society will help me a little bit to try to pull myself out of this cyclical, destruction of poverty and drug addiction and mental health issues. But what is it that I need to do to also help myself? And so, I started right away thinking about some of the neighborhoods. It's like you're automatically labeled if you grew up in an area that we call Dog City, for example. If you're from, just particular areas, they're like, oh yeah, she's from Dog City. So that means that there's no hope for you. People automatically expect you to fail in life. You're not going to get an education. You're going to start having sex by the time you're 11, 12 years old, pregnant by 14 or 15. Maybe some of those young people are even listening to this program now. What would you say to them if they are growing up in poverty, which is no fault of their own? They may have parents who are addicts. They may have, they're surrounded by little hope. What would you say to them on a personal level that might give them that little glimmer of hope?
You're precious. You're precious. You're valuable. You're amazing. And you're better than your circumstances. They said the same thing about me. And there's people that care. I mean, I really want folks to know, when I was growing up dirt poor in the ghettos of America, I thought nobody cared about me. And I was surrounded by people who probably didn't. I was surrounded, I was exposed to police officers. I was exposed to people looking down on me. I was exposed to people calling me some of the same names, criminal, delinquent, saying I'm a hopeless youth, they used to say back in the day. But there were a lot of other people, whether they expressed it or not, that were rooting for me, that believed in me, that believed that I could get out of those circumstances, that I had something, that I was a valuable human being, and I had something valuable to contribute to society. And I didn't deserve my circumstances. And so I think, again, it goes back to how we treat each other, but also don't believe the world, if the world's stigmatizing you and telling you that you're less than amazing and fantastic and a blessing, that we're all blessed that you're here. That's not really true if you start believing that you're not amazing. You are amazing. All of us here are blessings and have gifts and talents. And for young people, you truly have to know that you're capable of anything. But you do need resources and you do need support. And the adolescent brain isn't developed until 24, sometimes even 25. So that means that it really is up to us as adults and as stakeholders and leaders of communities to make sure we're investing properly in the youth, not just our own kids, because we tend to love our kids and hate everyone else's, but all kids, and truly create that village the way most civilizations have lived for centuries and centuries and centuries, or is community-based, not just this single parent household structure, but it's about community. So, but to be honest with you, some of these kids are absolutely trapped without help. And what they need, they need resources. We all have things that we don't know how to do at first. And the first thing we do is read the instructions, even simple things. Some of us wing it and we may make a mistake, but simple things, we simply just look at the instructions really quick. Even when we're driving, some of us our age have been driving forever. we still look at the signs. We still read the
Mhm.
signs. We still look for direction and instruction. We can't expect our youth to navigate a world without some sort of instruction, some sort of roads, signs, and roadmap toward a better life. And
Mhm.
so we just got to give them some instructions. We got to give them things like life skills. Even if you have ridiculous circumstances, like I'm talking
Mhm.
extreme trauma, extreme poverty, basic research says if you have a few protective factors, you could survive. You could
Mhm.
redirect your life to a more positive path. We have to be those protective factors in folks' lives. We have to give them things like social skills, life skills,
Mhm.
opportunities, and most importantly, we got to give them love and grace. You know, don't hate them so much because they're poor. They're born into a world where they're poor, they're
Mhm.
marginalized, isolated, and people, because of the stigma, avoid them or dislike them.
Mhm.
We can't allow ourselves to fall into that cognitive trap. We have to allow ourselves to fully activate our heroic powers, and that is
Mhm.
our ability to care, give some advice, give tips. When I was young and hopeless and had suicidal ideation, I was running and practicing football. I was out of shape, but I was practicing football on Saturday. And this person
Mhm.
didn't know it, but this is a full circle conversation. But I
Mhm.
was really struggling with wanting to kill myself just to hurt my parents because I was homeless and I was orphaned and I had nothing, but I played football and I was jogging. And there was this gentleman who struggled with cocaine addiction, colloquially known as a crackhead, who just cheered for me like he was my number one fan. And he said,
Wow.
"Don't stop. You're amazing. You're going to make it. You're going to make it, young man. Trust me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep practicing. Keep pushing." And I think he saved my life when he did that. And I never, every time
Mhm.
it got rough, whether it was clawing my way through community college or trying to establish myself at a university system,
Mhm.
I thought about that man. And I thought about how awesome he must have been to be
Mhm.
struggling with cocaine addiction on the corner outside where he lived and to cheer
Mm.
me on and give me that kind of validation and support.
Wow.
We have that capacity.
That's powerful. So, Debbie says, Sandy, kudos for addressing such a wide range of topics and also access to awesome professionals, whether local from overseas, such as today's guest. Thank you so much, Debbie. Yeah, that's powerful. And sometimes it just takes one person saying the right thing at the right moment to really change the course of any of our lives, quite frankly. I was also thinking of, the Native Americans in the U.S. and what their struggles have been, which include, just atrocities from the onset, from when Europeans started to come to America and taking of their land and just changing their entire way of life. And the compensation has been to put them on a reservation and say, oh, yeah, you can set up a casino, you can do gambling and make a little bit of money. But the reality is they've been trapped in a situation now, not really of their own making, where a vast majority of them, they have very high incidence of alcoholism and other addictions, abuse in the community. Domestic abuse is very, very high as compared to the rest of the sort of American community. So sometimes when people try to, in their minds, correct the wrongs that they have done at the societal community level, they get it completely wrong and they miss the mark, and they end up setting people up in situations that actually make it worse for them, which is, I mean, I don't even know how we address that. That's quite an enormous issue. But we do have someone who has worked with the Big Brothers Big Sisters program here in the Cayman Islands, which is a fantastic program, by the way. And I feel like there's ways that we can all give back. And I think the takeaway from what Dr. Johnson had just said is, sometimes you join a formal program like Big Brothers Big Sisters. It's structured. You can have access to these young people, you can impact them in that way. And then other times you don't need to be part of a program in order to have a positive impact. Maybe it's the kid in the neighborhood that you kind of see, by themselves or struggling, whatever. And every time you see them, you be their cheerleader. You tell them what a wonderful job they're doing. Let's just keep positive and keep on going and keep doing the right thing in life. Sometimes it's back to school. You want to give a young person a little token of, what, here's something for you, a new backpack, so that, you don't quite stand out as not having the financial means to be able to get ready for school and so forth. So I think there's always something that we can do, no matter what our stature is in life, no matter where we are, no matter how little or how much money you have. There's a way to definitely help other people, and I think that's really an important message. But there have been 10 adverse childhood experiences that have been identified. And I've had this discussion with this person who's part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters nonprofit organization here in the Cayman Islands. I just messaged them and I'm like, oh, can you remind me of that link again? And I just want to quickly go through the 10 adverse childhood experiences to remind people of the impact that this has. So essentially what this is the more of these, they call them ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that a person has, the more likely they are to have issues, especially if they've had it before the age of 18, the more likely they are to have issues with mental health, even their physical health, and of course, drug addiction and so on. So number one is physical abuse. So it's defined as non-accidental harm, includes everything from bruising, fractures, lesions, hitting, punching, kicking, shaking, beating, all this kind of stuff. And I want to say, doctor, I am, a product of the typical, I guess, African-American or Caribbean parenting style, right? Where you beat your children, basically. They don't do something you like, you put them in submission by exerting physical violence over them. As I have matured in my own journey in life, I am no longer at the point where I believe that that is the right way to deal with children. I think you deal with children with love and respect, and you can get children to bend and to mold and to do things that you want without having to yell at them, to scream at them, to shake them, to get aggressive with them. I don't know what your take is on this, because I think a lot of us, unfortunately, have bought into the fact that that's the way to discipline a child and that's what works. Because everybody's like, oh, well, I was beaten. Look at me. I'm okay. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't know if you're okay, first of all. And you're normally the last person to be able to give a proper assessment of whether or not you're okay. So
Right.
what's your take on corporal punishment, if you will, with children?
It's really interesting. I have a more nuanced perspective on it, but I definitely want to. If we can drop a link to a TEDx talk I did that kind of ties into everything we discussed about historical trauma, corporal punishment, and so on, adolescent health, and resources people need to survive. I wish I had a link to drop it in the chat.
Yes, you can. Do you have it? Do you have it there? There's a section with a private chat section.
Okay.
And if you put it there, then I can grab it and put it in the comment section.
Okay, let me find it real quick.
Yeah, just click on private chat and send that to me, because we definitely want to watch that.
Yeah, so I don't want to take people away from our current thing we're doing right now, but I definitely want to give them access to this, because I think it will give them a little bit more insight into my perspective on this. So corporal punishment, again, there's a continuum, right? There's a range from spanking and more traditional healthy stuff. Sometimes parents fake whip their kids, and so it's like, but there's no research on parenting and healthy outcomes in children that support spanking and physical punishment. It's just not heavily supported. So where does it come from? And if you notice, a lot of African cultures and Caribbean cultures, we have a culture of corporal punishment. I think a lot of it in these contexts are directly tied to historical issues like slavery. Even the idea of going to get a switch, even the idea of using a belt, it's a belt for a reason. It's a switch for a reason. Or even other types of objects that resemble a whip. In my understanding, the modern corporal punishment, like other contemporary practices, are rooted in the enslavement of these people.
Oh my gosh. I've said this before in this program, and I know people thought it was crazy, but here you go. A professional, Dr. Johnson, saying the exact same thing, folks. I totally get it. Wow. So I'm going to definitely watch your TED Talk. The link is there in the discussion. We've got lots of people messaging on WhatsApp saying they're really enjoying today's program. I just think that as Dr. Johnson has said, there's no evidence supporting it. And if you know something, because people say, well, what's it going to do? I'm okay, whatever. But if you know something has the potential to be harmful, and it's actually not beneficial when it comes to long-term sustainable behavioral changes, right? Why would you use it? And I think the reason why people use it is because they don't have any other tools in their toolbox. They don't have any other mechanisms to deal with children. So we revert to what we know. So we grew up being whipped and beaten and have a shoe thrown at you and yelled and screamed at. And so when we get in a place where we're upset or kids aren't doing what we need them to do, that's what we revert to, what you know. And so it is a mindset change. And I think that you, all of us as parents, it's a constant, shift in how our own behavior unfolds and how we engage with our children. Like sometimes you have to take a minute and you have to consciously think like, okay, I want to yell right now, but let me not yell. Let me just try to understand what the issue is. Ask your child if they're like, oh, I don't want to do this and whatever. Don't just say, you're going to do it. And, I'm going to hit you with this belt if you don't. Ask them why. Why are they feeling anxious about a situation? What's the root cause of the anxiety? I was having a little bit of an issue this morning with my daughter saying, oh, she doesn't want to do swimming because, she doesn't put on her swimsuit. So she knows today, she's only 6 years old. She knows today is like swimming day. I don't want to go swimming. I said, why? Like we did this intense program during the summer. I could see it coming. So I tried to prep her during the summer every day. We were doing swimming. And I said, okay, tell me what's going on. Why are you feeling anxious about this? Why don't you want to go? And I was able to pat myself on the back afterwards because I took a situation where she was adamant that she didn't want to go swimming. By the end of, 5 minutes later, literally, we had her in her swimsuit, uniform on, excited about swimming because I was willing to reward her, not punish her, but I was willing to reward her. If you go to swimming today and you do a good job, you're going to get some extra points because we do a little point system. So you're going to get some extra points that'll go towards your toy. So now that refocused her energy into thinking, instead of hyper focusing and being upset about swimming, because I'm not going to be there because during the summer I went every day for the swim camp. Now she's like, oh, well, okay, what kind of toy can I get? Is that going to be like one toy or two toys? So it kind of just redirected her onto something more positive that she could focus on. We got the swimsuit on, able to get her eating all her breakfast and out the door. And it was no trauma, no tears, no nothing. But it takes time sometimes to get there because I didn't have, as a child, the experience of anyone doing that methodology in me. It was like, you're going to do what you're told because I'm the adult and you do what adults tell you. You don't question adults and it is what it is. And if you question adults, or if you have an opinion of your own or a mind of your own, they're going to be corporal results as a result of that. And I also tie in, and Dr. Johnson, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but the way in which we treat children and the way in which we, communicate with children and having them think that they don't have an opinion of their own, they don't have a mind of their own, that they can't make their own decisions, also leads to them being likely to be abused in other ways by people who are predators, So when that sexual predator in the family, Uncle Joe, who's been touching all the little girls and boys in the family, when he approaches your child and he tells them, oh, don't tell anyone, or, you're going to get in trouble. You're at fault for this. They're more likely to believe that if they have grown up in an environment. This is just my, sort of non-professional opinion, but I think they're more likely to believe that if they have grown up in an environment where they don't believe that they have a voice, where they're not being, it's not positive reinforcement. It's not love. It's not, I'm going to love you no matter what happens in this world, sort of mentality. What are your thoughts on that? Because of course, that is the second thing on our list of adverse childhood experiences is indeed sexual abuse.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I would say yes. There's your main point being that confidence and feeling like someone has a voice and can communicate. Mm-hmm. That definitely is helpful if something does happen to someone. So is someone more victimized because there's a lack of parenting supervision, a lack of communication, and a weak relationship with parents? Absolutely. Predators prey and groom children that tend to have a lack of confidence. Mm-hmm. And they tend to not have the best relationships with their families and their support systems. But anybody can be a victim of sexual mm-hmm. abuse too. So I don't want a survivor listening to say, man, I actually grew up well and, I'm still victimized. It's me. No, anyone can be a victim and anyone can get caught up in the trap of grooming and silencing. And these are children at the end of the day. You know what I mean? We're talking about children, right? Mm. So these are children. So children, again, are looking up to adults for protection. They naturally have evolved to do this. They've naturally evolved that adults will protect me and look out for me. So unfortunately, we have not been doing our jobs, our instinctual, natural jobs to take care of kids. So we do have to have that strong. We have to empower our children to be able to speak to us and talk to us. Now, for some of us who grew up like me, yes, it seems very uncomfortable for children to talk to you a certain way, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should learn how to talk to you with respect and dignity. But that the way to teach that probably is not physically. I think the way you teach that requires more time and patience. And that's, you ask why it's because we only know what we know, know, and I turned out okay. And I love my mom, and my mama beat me. So it's like, my mama beat me, I'm gonna beat my kids. People say that to me all the time. But there's a better way, like our parents didn't raise us to be their copies. Our parents raised us to be much better than they were. And so our parents got us to a point, and it's our job to move the needle forward and give our children opportunities that we didn't have. So yes, I think that you're absolutely right with building confidence and building someone's voice in their self-dignity will help them at least be able to seek resources if something happens to them.
Yes, absolutely. And Selvin says, what does the doc say about the Bible, spare the rod and spoil the child, which precedes the slavery he referenced? So can I answer this question? Then I'll let the doctor answer it as well. Okay. I always say to people, the Bible was probably the biggest exercise in interpretation. It was not written in English. And so it came from a language that, thousands of years later, people were trying to translate what it meant. Translate different sections. There are books of the Bible that didn't even make it in the Bible. So if we really want to talk about the Bible being a complete text, it isn't. So I think you need to take things in context. There's a lot of important, lessons in the Bible, a lot of things in Proverbs that, good mantras to live your life by. But what I would say to this, Selvin, and this to me is just one of those common sense elements when it says the rod of correction, and it talks about the analogy of the sheep and the shepherd. Tell me where you've ever seen a shepherd beat a sheep with that rod of correction. It doesn't happen. It is a gentle rod of correction. And in fact, the tools that a good shepherd uses to keep the sheep on the right path and to guide them where they need to go are things like a dog that is a sheep herding dog that comes in and provides assistance. And the dog, again, doesn't bite up the sheep. He doesn't get aggressive with the sheep. He doesn't beat up the sheep. It is, he gently moves, and all of a sudden, the entire herd of sheep moves in the direction that he intends them to move. So I think our interpretation of certain sections, in particular this one, when it comes to, the reasons why we chastise our children in particular, is we have completely misinterpreted the intended message. The rod of correction does not have to be a rod, a physical rod that you beat someone with. It is literally a mechanism or tools of how you guide, how you bend that tree. What's the bonsai tree, right? The way that you get that to have that beautiful shape is over time. You take your time day in and day out, and you shape the tree, you shape every single limb. And with our children, we do that every day, reinforcing messages. When my daughter says, "Oh, mommy, I love you," and I said, "No, I love you more." That's a little bending, and you bend and you bend, and it takes a lifetime. It's not any one, like, "Oh, I'm going to beat you this week. We have a weekly beating session, and that is how you're going to become a better person." It's the daily communications that you have with your children, the time that you spend with them. Importantly, also living the example that you want them to then evolve into, right? Trying to push yourself as parents to be better people, to engage in positive relationships with other people in your life, your spouses, your boyfriends, your siblings, and all this other stuff. Like showing children what positive relationships look like. Don't allow them to grow up in dysfunctional homes, because you can beat children all you want, but if they're growing up in chaos and they're growing up in dysfunctional homes and they're seeing nothing but people fighting at each other constantly, what do you think the outcome is going to be, no matter how much you beat that child? That's just my take on it. Doc?
I agree with you. I got to tell you, I agree with you 100% on your response to that answer. I think it was beautifully articulated. I'm just going to emphasize your point that Again, we should rely on the expert. There's a pastor who could provide more, but you spoke like a true evangelical sister, so I'm going to let you answer it. But really, the Bible that's a common analogy in the Bible to shepherds, sheep, and rods. I mean, they don't mean literal sheep, literal shepherds, but shepherds, sheep, and rods. And the rod is a symbol. And as you indicate, it's more about discipline. So it's more about leadership, leading, and having some discipline, and being that guide, like the shepherd with the rod.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean everyone should have a rod and use that to discipline their children. I don't think that's my interpretation of it. So.
Yeah. So we do have a comment here, again, from Sarah Sue. Sarah Sue says that she actually, let me just find it again. She says, I've been posting on Facebook nonstop, voicing my concerns about the drug usage, particularly the crack cocaine and Cayman Brac. So just to let you know, Dr. Johnson, we have 3 islands. There's Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman. So Cayman Brac is kind of like the middle island. A couple of thousand people live there. And she goes on to say, as a child of an addict, I wish an intervention was done many years ago. Continue to speak on this, no matter how uncomfortable it makes everyone. We need to stop living in denial. Just because you were fortunate enough to not grow up seeing abuse and addiction firsthand does not mean that it's not right there in the BRAC. Speak more on family trauma, generational abuse, and then unfortunately, it got cut off. So thank you, Sarah Sue, because there is a stigma that's attached to addiction. There's a stigma that's attached to mental health issues. And we know for us to even say that we're adjacent to that. In other words, it might not be me that's suffering from mental health or addiction, but if I say I had a mother or a parent, all of a sudden we are judged because of that. Like, oh, you're going to be crazy too because your mother suffered from bipolarism or whatever. So I think we do need to destigmatize it. And the only way that we can do that is by having these really frank and open discussions. And at some point, the hashtag Me Too movement saying, yes, I'm an addict. Yes, I suffer from mental health issues, I know someone in my family who does, and this is the issue. One of the things I love about Tiffany Haddish is how she has been, through her, she's an American comedian, for those of you who may not know, but through her comedy and through her interviews, she's now considered, I guess, a bit of an A-lister. She has really shared her life experiences of having a mother who had severe mental health issues to the point where her children had to be taken away from her. And, talking about how disruptive that was for her life, how literally, she said the first time that she really felt like there was some hope in her life is when someone gave her a suitcase, because then they were like, this is yours. You can pack your little suitcase, you can have your little suitcase, but she actually felt like owning something, as simple as a suitcase might be, meant that she was starting to find her way in life and she could settle down and she was going to eventually have her home. And, the way that childhood trauma impacts all of us can be very, very different. So in her case, she turned to comedy. She didn't turn to drugs. She turned to comedy to try to cope with a lot of the things that she was experiencing, finding a way to kind of make light of it. But even the decisions that she's making now, I was reading an article recently where when she got her first decent paycheck from one of the comedy movies that she just did, the first thing she did was went and paid off her house, because she didn't want to ever be homeless again, because she has, even when she was a comedian as an adult, she was homeless and she was living in a car. And that's a result of being in the American foster care system and not having the best start in life kind of put her where, even as someone who's now a celebrity, it took her a while to get caught up. But she's like, listen, I don't ever want to be homeless again. So the first priority for me is a bit of financial freedom, make sure that I don't owe anybody for this house. I'm going to finish paying it off in cash. So yes, And
you touched on two more ACEs, household substance misuse and addiction, and then household mental illness. So those are 2 more addictions, and it's extremely challenging. And homelessness is not an official ACE, but it's one of the most traumatic, challenging experiences, especially for children. Right. And it's directly tied to those ACEs. Homelessness is directly tied to having a parent who suffers with addiction or having a parent who suffers with a serious mental illness.
Yes. So on the list, let's go back to the list of ACEs. We have emotional abuse. So number 2 was sexual abuse, any sort of sexual abuse, exploitation of children, everything from indecent exposure using a child in prostitution, pornography, covers the gamut. Then we have emotional abuse, which I think is a lot of things that we all sort of probably have had some degree of experience as children with, and we don't even recognize it as emotional abuse, which is so incredibly interesting, right? So everything from verbal abuse, mental abuse, psychological maltreatment, whether you were like the stepchild that everybody else belittled, rejecting, ridiculing, blaming, threatening, isolating you, restricting social interactions, denying the child an emotional response, and purposely not talking to the child for extended periods of time, which is, again, so fascinating. I'm going to share this link with you guys so that you can go through it and read it when you have a bit more time. Number 4 is physical neglect. So not providing for the child's most basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, medical attention, and so on. Lack of supervision is another way that you can physically neglect a child. Emotional neglect, again, failure to meet a child's emotional needs. So, proper mental health support if they need mental health treatment. I am so flabbergasted when I hear people in this community who know that children suffer from ADHD or they have other issues. They know that medication can help or there are treatment options that are available. And they say, no, I'm not going to get my child this treatment. I'm not going to put them on medication. Like, I've heard of parents pulling their child out of therapy because they don't want anybody in Cayman to know that my child is bipolar and they have to take medication to stabilize that particular mental health issue. And so they just throw their child to the wolves and say, yeah, okay, just live in a normal world, although you were struggling with these types of issues. It's just crazy.
Yeah. But I do empathize with them a little bit. And I have grace because sometimes the shame and the stigma is more frightening than the actual medical condition. And it has to be safe. It has to be safe in the community. On your beautiful islands, in your beautiful communities, it has to be safe for someone to disclose, or for the public to know, or for the community to know, and still be treated in a humane way, still be treated with dignity, and it not sort of define who they are in a negative way. So I understand a mother trying to protect their child from that sort of public shame and humiliation and stigma. But it really is a cycle of antipathy where you have this stigma, and in response to stigma, children either go undiagnosed or untreated. And it just creates the cycle of poor health. And further, isolation of folks who really need social support and resources. So again, it goes back to the way we treat each other as human beings. And I think we all need to just take mental steps to just think about these things differently. And we need to be reminded that all of us have some sort of health issue. All of us have been exposed to some sort of mental anguish at some point in our lives, whether it be chronic depression, episodic anxiety. We've all been there. So it's okay. It's a human experience. It's absolutely okay. And for those of us with chronic conditions, they need support. They need love and grace. They don't really need to be further stigmatized, isolated, and shamed.
Absolutely. So I've shared some links here. You can follow Dr. Johnson on Instagram. It's is it Micah? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep, Micah.
Johnson.
Like the book of Micah.
And if you're on the link right now, on the live link, I've actually put his Instagram handle there so that you can follow him for more useful information. I'm definitely going to be checking out his TED Talk a little bit later on as well. So number 6 on the list was mental illness. So this is where someone else in the household has a mental illness. Sometimes it's a parent who's not able to take adequate care of a child. Also, failing to model appropriate behavior for the child, perhaps. Sometimes a mental illness can actually be another sibling, like an older sibling who's suffering from mental illness that either isn't being properly handled, isn't being diagnosed, or maybe it is, and it still has an impact on that child and the experience that they will have as a younger sibling, or even, I often think about, there are children who maybe an elder brother or sister has a disability, for example. And then when you come along, your parents are so focused on trying to address the disability of that particular child that you always kind of get shorted a little bit with the amount of attention that you might get and so forth, because there is someone in the home with a special need that requires so much attention. So a lot of complex components to that. An incarcerated relative. So children who grew up with an incarcerated parent may grow up primarily in a single parent household. And that presents a number of challenges as well. And of course, if you have people who are engaging in any sort of illegal activity in your household and your child is being exposed to that, that is definitely one of the ACEs that you want to be cognizant of. Number 8, the mother treated violently. So any violent in the home being traumatic, but especially if the primary caregiver of the child is the victim of that violence. So, this is often the case where women are the primary caregivers and they are also the victims of violence from their spouses or partners. And even if the children are not being traumatized physically by that same individual, just witnessing that primary caregiver be victimized is extremely, it's trauma for that child. So, I want people to remember that, especially as we see more and more cases reach, the domestic violence court. Substance abuse, number 9 on the list, which again is something that obviously we're talking about here on International Overdose Awareness Day, and then also divorce having a negative impact on children. So those are some of the ACEs, folks. Again, I'm going to share this list. It talks about it. There's an entire website here at Integrative Life Center that has very, very useful information. Children didn't come with a manual, but I think that all of us as parents can read books and research, maybe not a proper research paper, but you can read summaries of research, things that we should and shouldn't do that could lead us to just being better parents and creating that really positive environment that you want your children to grow up in. So Kimaria, says that your circumstances shouldn't depict your status in life. If not, it's not where you come from. It's your insights on life, and ambition is the compass in life. So that's positivity and a really great mantra. But the reality is, when we talk about these ACEs, that you have to be willing to try to change your circumstances, especially parents who then go on to have children. You've got to try to create these environments where your children have a fighting chance, because the more of those ACEs that they have, the more likely that they're going to grow up as people with addictions, mental health issues, and so on. So we've got to try to change those circumstances.
Absolutely.
Brenda says, Doctor, what would be your suggestion or diagnosis to a child suffering from panic attacks and anxiety related to school?
The first thing I would say is to seek like an expert on pediatric therapy and counseling, someone who particularly specializes in anxiety among minors, and build that relationship and trust their expertise. Again, I can't speak directly to a therapy or a treatment because I don't know the detailed context and circumstances. But I think that getting some help, getting some good old-fashioned help from an expert will go a long way. And some of these now, warning, a psychologist or a counselor won't be perfect. They won't be perfect, but they'll have tools and they'll have trainings that will go a long way. And that can do a lot to help you and your child survive and thrive through whatever the situation is you're currently going through. And I just wish you the best of luck. And I'm going to send a prayer for you. And it's not atypical. A lot of children deal with anxiety, especially around school. And I think that with the proper help and the proper therapy, you get through it.
All right. A few more comments, and then we're going to have to let the doctor go. So Sarah Sue says that parents aren't the only influence in a child's life. I know people with great lives that fell into the wrong influences, and there are children who grew up in horrible environments who are breaking generational curses. So definitely there's always exceptions to the rule. But remember, those exceptions are just what they say. They're exceptions. So, the rule will cover probably 97% of people. And then you've got that 3%er who, no matter what they grew up in with how many ACEs around them, they are just destined to be great people, the Oprahs of the world. But, there are not that many Oprahs in the world. So I think the focus is, if you know that people grew up experiencing all of these things, and they're less likely to be able to pull themselves out of that situation. What you try to do as parents is really make the necessary adjustments then immediately in your households to try to make that environment as conducive to positive adolescents and adults. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to the program this morning. Dr. Micah Johnson, we've been listening to him. Please go follow him on Instagram. We shared links to the TED Talk, and we also have, he just gave us another NPR link for the ACEs, my favorite news site, NPR. So much educational information on their different platforms. Go and check that one out as well. So any final words, Dr. Johnson, for our listeners this morning?
Well, I want to, I'll close with the consequences of the ACEs, and then I'll address the final comment, which is a good place to stop. The ACEs have been linked to the leading causes of death in adults. So we know it's damaging for children, but even later, long-term, down a life course and a lifespan, it has these really adverse effects. Stuff like suicidal ideation increases 400%. The chronic pulmonary heart disease increases. So these ACEs are very serious. And there is some really fascinating and compelling research on the ACEs, linking them to the leading causes of death among adults. It's very powerful. The piece about, and that last comment sort of spoke to something that's the foundation of child psychiatry. There's a guy named Michael Rudder, 1985. He's actually Sir because he was knighted by the Queen because of the quality of his research. And he's the father, again, of child psychiatry. And he, in 1985, published this paper looking at this very question of, even in the context of extreme adversity, why don't all youth succumb? And this is going back to something I mentioned at the beginning of the show, is that even in difficult, very challenging circumstances, people survive and thrive. Why? And the why goes back down to this idea of risk and protective factors. Risk and protective factors. Even with severe risk, if someone has those protective factors, someone has that crackhead that would cheer them on a Saturday where it's hot and burning and they feel like hopeless, have nothing, but they have that one person cheering them on. Or if they have maybe they don't have the best parental circumstances, but they have friends, they have neighbors, they have teachers, they have pastors, they have folks that invest in them and care about them. Those protective factors can attenuate the effects of ACEs. Even though the ACEs are strong and dangerous and scary, they're not more powerful than our basic human decency.
Wow.
They're not more powerful than our simple acts of human decency and human kindness. So I'll close here. We know the research. It's there. 37 years we've known about risk and protective factors. The very fascinating piece of this is that we now know that in somebody's life, we are a risk or a protective factor. We create trauma, or we help folks heal, thrive, and live to their full potential. I encourage you all, each day of your life, try to be a protective factor. Even if you're in a circumstance in traffic and you're angry and you're upset, try to be a protective factor. Try to be a protective factor in the lives of strangers, your neighbors, but especially in the lives of the people that you care about the most, that you interact with the most. Be a protective factor as much as you can. There's enough stress and ugliness in the world. And I think that we are the cure, the real treatment for all of these issues we discussed.
Wow. So incredibly powerful. Dr. Micah Johnson, please go and follow him on Instagram. I put up the TED Talk. Maybe we'll share it another day here on the show as well, because I'm sure it's very, very valuable and interesting information. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Sarah Sue says, wow, I'm so glad I tuned in. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. This spoke directly to me. And I know that you've spoken directly to a lot of people. We've got listeners on the radio this morning, Bobo 89.1 FM. We've got a couple hundred people here in the live stream. So thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully you won't be a stranger. You'll be back on the program again. And we just appreciate your passion and your wealth of knowledge that you were able to share with us today.
Thank you so much. A fantastic show, amazing work, amazing job. And thank you to all the listeners, viewers. I appreciate it. And I hope that you bring me back sometime soon.
Absolutely. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you.
All right, folks. So that's Dr. Johnson. Wow. That's a lot to unpack. Gave me a lot of food for thought for sure. And what can I say? There's some mornings when we dig really, really deep here on this program. Like I said, I know it's challenging. It's challenging to think, how can I be a better parent? How can I be a better person? How can I be a better member of, the community even? A better community leader. So good morning, caller, and welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning, Miss Andy.
Yes, hi.
Hi, it's Johan Moxham.
Hi, Johan.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Just really quickly, this has been the most enlightening and, in my opinion, the best show. Like, that guy is amazing. You run a great show. It's I know what I don't know, and this morning was really, really educational. Congratulations. Thank you a million times for putting this together. Just overall brilliant, and nobody cusses you more and gives you more grief than me. So that it's a real compliment if I'm doing this, especially live on air. But I just wanted to also add to the general theme of this morning. When you consider the fact that in Cayman, drugs are real, we have real drug problems. A lot of the times it's generational, but here's the conversation that we're not having as a country. The pursuit of those involved in the importation and the dealing of drugs is not a fair sort of system. If you are of color, local, if you live in a particular area, police are all over you. Okay? There's raids, there's shutting down. What's that place across from Funky Times? Archie's, that place must get shut down every week or every 2 weeks, right? I'm not saying that they shouldn't or venues shouldn't get raided and stuff, but when was the last time there was a nightclub or bar on the 7 Mile Strip where high-end clientele and I guess you could say the non-Caymanians tend to congregate? When was the last time the police made their focus of going down there, figuring it out? When was the last time there was a raid of an upscale party in Cayman where we all know, because I've been to a few, all right, there's some stuff going on in the bathroom and it's not smoking weed. All I'm saying is we don't take drugs and trying to stop the stem of drugs seriously, because the only people that are bad that do drugs apparently are persons of color, Caymanians, locals, and all the rest of it. Why can't the RCIPS commit their resources to approaching a zero tolerance strategy across the board? Because there are bars that you can go to on the 7 Mile Strip. Bartenders sell drugs. There are people in these bars that frequent every week. They sell drugs. You have to be blind as Stevie Wonder to not figure that out. The only ones that seem to be blind to it are the RCIPS. And I'd like to ask the question, as a concerned citizen, why is that? It's a scourge in our community, but it's as if only certain people are guilty of being involved and others just get away with it. And we're talking prescription drug abuse. We're talking heavy, heavy drugs, cocaine, fentanyl, the whole 9 yards that are the glamour sort of drugs. But nobody has that conversation. But you get caught with weed, you got a problem. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix. Great show this morning, and I know you'll carry on the discussion. Great job.